Welcome back to part two. In the first one, we covered the definition of money. In this section, I'll cover fiat money and its creation. This topic is very, very important. I'd like your full attention to it. Debasement and inflation. How does that happen? One of the key functions of money is that it's a store of value. In the past or in throughout history, gold and silver was used to store value. There were other things as well, but primarily gold and silver was what was used. The money in circulation was always gold and silver or something that was supported by it. And what used to happen is even paper money that was created was supported by the underlying gold and silver. Now, a lot of corrupt politicians and weak government, they will go out and fight wars and do lavish spending, and they'll run out of money. And the way they actually coped with that is they tempered with the money. What they did was they would debase the currency, print more of it by just mixing additional metal in their silver or in their gold. And you can go back in history and see in France and England, people did temper with their currencies and it lost value. The underlying gold and silver did not lose value. The currency lost value because it was tempered with. That is not the only reason that currency loses value. In Spain, what had happened is that in the 16th, 17th century, when they went into South America and North America, they got so much gold and silver when it came back into Spain, they were flushed with money. There was oversupply of goods like gold and silver, and production could not be keep pace. And because the production could not be keep pace, the value or the purchasing power of money plummeted, and that actually caused debasement of the currency. Even though there was a lot of gold available, it is still lost value. As I said, money that was supported by gold and silver did not lose value because it was always supported by gold and silver, which retained its value mostly, right? Some events happened in 1930s and 40s which created fiat money, which is money in the hands of politicians, which is not supported by any commodity or currency. You need to understand this because it has changed the world of finance and economics substantially in the new world. In 1933, what happened is that the US government came out and said it's illegal for public to hold gold, and they bought all the gold through Federal Reserve, and now the US government technically held all of the gold that was in US. They bought it at $20.67 an ounce. And then right after that, 1 year from that, they debased it so that they changed the price to $35 an ounce. And that actually meant that anybody who had gold lost 40% of their value overnight. Savers were paid $20.67 a cent, and now they only had $35 an ounce. Now, the one thing to understand is that US government, when it's working through Federal Reserve is privately owned. It works with the government, but it's privately owned. What happened in 1944 was way more important than what happened earlier. There were delegates from 44 countries that got together. Now you have to picture where the world is right in 1944. The Second World War is coming to an end, and most of the countries have been destroyed because of the war. They need some sort of an economic system which was in a disarray at that moment. US government proposed that they would actually peg US dollar to the gold and confirm a price of $35 an ounce, and they would give a guarantee for that price. And they effectively made US dollar the prime reserve currency of the world by guaranteeing $35 an ounce. That promise would quickly be broken, but effectively that's how it came into being. Then they said to monitor trade, they would have fixed exchange rates between the country, and exchange rates will not move more than 1%, and that was a margin fixed. It also created IMF and the World Bank, which at that time were critical for development of the world. But now both institutions are actually used to, enslave the global South and most of Asia. And if you need to hear more about it, you should read Confessions of Economic Hitman by John Perkins. It's an eye opener. You would actually gain a lot by reading that book. After the World War, there was US dollar had become the reserve currency of the world. There was lots of trade across the globe that were happening in US dollar, and because of that there was a significant demand of US dollar, and people were not sure whether dollar would actually retain its value. So countries like France and United Kingdom, they aggressively started converting their US dollars into gold reserves, and they started purchasing physical gold from the US government. In 1971, gold reserve had really fallen almost half of what it used to be because there was unsustainable drain on it. In addition, what happened is that the US domestic economy was struggling. There was high inflation and there was high unemployment. And because of the Vietnam War, they were really struggling. So Nixon comes out and says that, from now on, there is no peg to the US dollar. They broke the promise of $35 an ounce. And that is when fiat currency was born, because after that, the currencies were not supported by gold and silver. They became independent, and exchange rates started becoming floating because you could actually exchange at any different rate. And that is when fiat money went out of control and people started printing as much debt as they liked. A few critical events happened in the early 1970s. First thing, Nixon broke the promise of $35 an ounce. So instead of the currency actually falling, what happened is gold lost its luster. US government became the single producer of gold, so to say, because they were the only people producing US dollar. Now, US dollar was still being used as a reserve currency, even though they had broken the promise of $35 an ounce. In 1973, what happened is OPEC countries came out and put an oil embargo which quadrupled the prices. And there was a significant amount of US dollar that was flushed into those oil exporting countries. In 74, Henry Kissinger met with the Saudis and came up with an agreement with them that Saudis will only sell oil in US dollars. That gave a significant boost to US dollars. In exchange, they got a promise from US that they would be fully supported by US military and their political protection. And those promises lasted for a long time. In 1975, other OPEC countries also started to price everything in US dollar, and petrodollar was born. How it was used as oil was priced in US dollar, most of the quotations were in US dollar, the settlement was in US dollar. So effectively, everything was passing through the US banks in the dollar network. The money was being recycled back into the US because treasuries were bought, and the excess money was kept in the US as well. A lot of real estate were bought in the US from the excess money, and effectively a significant amount of reserves were kept in the US dollars. This gave dollar dominance, and it gave the power to the US government, which underpins all of the financial sanctions that they are currently able to do, because all of the payments were being routed through the US um, for US dollars.